Love yourself first. Learn to love yourself more than anyone else. Full audiobook. Before you listen any further, let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you truly chose yourself? Not when it was convenient, not when everyone agreed, but when it mattered. Because the most important relationship you will ever have in your entire life is not with your partner, not with your family, not with your friends. It is with you. And if that relationship is broken, strained, or neglected, every other relationship you build will carry the damage. This audiobook is not about ego. It's not about arrogance. And it's not about pretending everything is perfect. This is about self-respect. This is about self-trust. This is about learning to stand in your own presence without shrinking, apologizing, or seeking permission to exist. Welcome to Love Yourself First, a journey that will challenge what you've been taught, expose what you've tolerated, and rebuild the relationship that determines everything else in your life. Because here's the truth most people never hear. You don't attract better relationships. You don't create confidence. You don't build peace or success until you stop abandoning yourself. Chapter 1. The relationship you've been avoiding. Most people spend their entire lives searching for love. They chase it through relationships, through achievement, through attention, through approval. They think love is something you earn. So they perform, they adapt, they overgive. They stay quiet when something hurts. They say yes when their body is screaming no. And slowly, invisibly, they disappear. What they don't realize is this. The love they are searching for externally is the love they refuse to give themselves internally. You don't feel lonely because you're alone. You feel lonely because you've disconnected from yourself. You don't feel unworthy because others failed you. You feel unworthy because you learned to measure yourself through their eyes. And somewhere along the way, you learned something dangerous. That your value depends on being chosen. Chosen by a partner. Chosen by a group. Chosen by success. Chosen by validation. So you made a quiet deal with yourself. I'll love myself later. When I'm better. When I'm thinner. When I succeed. When someone stays. But later never comes. Because self-love doesn't arrive after perfection. It arrives before it. Why self-love feels so uncomfortable. If loving yourself feels wrong, if it feels selfish, if it feels unfamiliar, that's not because it's incorrect. It's because you were trained out of it. You were taught to be agreeable before authentic, polite before honest, useful before whole. You were rewarded for compliance, praised for sacrifice, conditioned to believe that loving yourself meant neglecting others. So you learned to minimize your needs, question your instincts, and doubt your own worth. Over time, this becomes your normal. You stop asking what you feel. You stop honoring what you need. You stop trusting your inner voice. And then you wonder why you feel lost. The cost of not loving yourself. When you don't love yourself, you tolerate what hurts you. You accept less than you deserve. You stay where you're not respected. You chase people who make you feel small, not because you're weak, but because part of you believes this is all you're worth. Lack of self-love doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like overachievement. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like constant distraction. But underneath all of it is the same wound. I am not enough as I am. And that belief shapes every decision you make. This is where it changes. Self-love is not self-praise. It is not ignoring your flaws. It is not pretending you don't need growth. Self-love is loyalty to yourself. It is staying present when things get uncomfortable. It is choosing honesty over approval. It is protecting your energy the way you protect what matters. And here's what most people never realize. When you love yourself first, you don't lose people. You lose illusions. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop begging to be seen. And the world responds differently to someone who stands rooted in their own worth. This audiobook will teach you how to rebuild self-trust, Break validation addiction. Set boundaries without guilt. Heal the inner voice that criticizes you. Choose yourself without fear. And finally, feel at home in your own mind. But first, you need to understand why loving yourself feels like the hardest thing you've ever tried. And that story begins with the voice inside your head. The one that never shuts up. The one that judges. The one that doubts. In the next chapter, we confront it. Chapter 2. The voice that shapes your worth. There is a voice in your head that speaks before you do. It comments on your reflection. It judges your decisions. It replays conversations long after they're over. It asks, "Was I enough? Did I say the wrong thing? What if they leave?" You didn't choose this voice, but you learned to obey it. And for most of your life, you believed it was you. But here's the truth that changes everything. That voice is not your identity. It is conditioning. It was built sentence by sentence, moment by moment. Through criticism you absorbed, through expectations placed on you, through love that felt conditional. Every time approval came with strings attached, your inner voice learned fear. Every time your feelings were dismissed, your inner voice learned silence. Every time you were praised only when you performed, your inner voice learned pressure. And now, it speaks constantly. How self-talk becomes self-belief. Your mind is always listening, not just when you speak out loud, but when you whisper things silently. "I'm not good at this. I always mess things up. They're probably disappointed. I shouldn't need so much." Those aren't harmless thoughts. They are instructions. Your nervous system reacts to them. Your confidence adjusts to them. Your choices follow them. And slowly, quietly, your life aligns with the way you talk to yourself. This is why self-love doesn't start with affirmations. It starts with awareness. You cannot heal a voice you never question. The inner critic is trying to protect you. Here's something important to understand. Your inner critic isn't evil. It's scared. It learned that staying alert prevents rejection, that self-judgment prevents embarrassment, that overthinking prevents loss. So it tries to control everything. It tells you to stay small, so you won't fail. It tells you to stay quiet, so you won't be judged. It tells you to stay useful, so you won't be abandoned. But protection that suffocates is no longer protection. And this is where self-love becomes an act of courage. You must become the voice you needed. Loving yourself doesn't mean silencing the critic overnight. It means interrupting the abuse. It means noticing the tone you use with yourself and asking a powerful question. Would I ever speak to someone I love this way? If the answer is no, then something has to change. Because every time you accept internal cruelty, you normalize external mistreatment. When you treat yourself with compassion, you raise the standard for how others can treat you. Replacing the old voice. You don't fight the old voice with force. You outgrow it with truth. Instead of, "I'm failing," you say, "I'm learning." Instead of, "I'm too much," you say, "I'm allowed to take up space." Instead of, "I should be better by now," you say, "I'm allowed to grow at my pace." This isn't lying to yourself. This is reparenting yourself. It's becoming the steady presence you never had. And at first, it will feel unnatural, because peace feels unfamiliar to a nervous system trained on tension. But stay with it. Self-love is built in small defenses. You don't wake up one day magically confident. You build it decision by decision. You defend your rest. You honor your boundaries. You say no without apology. You stop explaining your worth. And slowly, the inner voice changes. It softens. It steadies. It becomes an ally instead of a judge. But this is only the beginning. Because the next challenge isn't the voice inside your head. It's the fear of what happens when you finally stop seeking permission to be yourself. And that fear keeps more people trapped than failure ever could. That's where we go next. Chapter 3. The addiction to approval. There is a quiet addiction that doesn't look like weakness. It looks like kindness. It looks like generosity. It looks like being easy to be around, but underneath, it's fear. Fear of disappointing, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being left. So you say yes when you mean no. You explain yourself too much. You overgive, you overperform, you overextend. Not because you want to, but because somewhere inside you learned this rule. If I'm valuable enough, I'll be safe. And that belief shapes everything. Why approval feels like survival. Approval feels good because it feels like relief. Relief from anxiety. Relief from self-doubt. Relief from the fear of rejection. When someone validates you, your nervous system relaxes. Your mind goes quiet, just for a moment. And so you chase that moment again. You adapt your personality. You soften your opinions. You hide your needs. You become what's acceptable. But here's the cost no one talks about. The more you live for approval, the more invisible you become to yourself. When love becomes conditional, many people didn't grow up learning that love could be stable. They learned that love had rules. Be polite, be useful, be successful, be calm, be grateful. So self-worth became something earned, not something inherent. And now, as an adult, you confuse being liked with being loved. But being liked requires performance. Being loved requires presence. And you cannot perform your way into peace. The exhaustion of being good enough. Living for approval is exhausting. Because the finish line keeps moving, there's always someone else to impress. Another standard to meet. Another version of yourself to maintain. And the scariest part? People who live this way often look strong on the outside, capable, reliable, put together. But inside, they feel empty. Because no amount of praise can fill the space left by self-abandonment. The turning point, choosing yourself. Self-love begins the moment you ask, "What do I actually want?" without explaining it to anyone. That question feels dangerous at first, because it threatens old patterns. Choosing yourself means risking disapproval. It means letting people misunderstand you. It means being okay with not being everyone's favorite. But here's the truth. Anyone who only loves the version of you that performs does not love you. They love the benefit. You don't need to prove your worth. Your worth does not increase when you sacrifice yourself. It doesn't rise when you stay quiet. It doesn't grow when you shrink. You were worthy before you ever learned to try. And when you stop chasing approval, something powerful happens. Your energy comes back. Your voice strengthens. Your boundaries clarify. You stop asking, "Am I enough?" and start asking, "Is this right for me?" That shift changes everything. But there's still one more layer to face. Because loving yourself isn't just about saying no to others. It's about staying with yourself when discomfort, loneliness, and fear show up. And that is the hardest kind of loyalty. Continue Chapter 4, Staying, when it gets uncomfortable. Most people don't abandon themselves during success. They abandon themselves during discomfort, when loneliness appears, when doubt creeps in, when old wounds get triggered. That's when the instinct to escape shows up. You distract, you overwork, you reach for someone else's attention, you look for anything outside yourself to make the feeling stop. But self-love is not about avoiding pain. Self-love is about staying. Why being alone feels so loud. Silence reveals what distraction hides. When you're alone with yourself, there's no applause, no validation, no external proof that you matter. And so the mind starts talking. Am I doing enough? Why do I feel behind? What if I'm not lovable as I am? These thoughts aren't the enemy. They are signals. They point to the places inside you that were never taught how to feel safe. The skill nobody teaches. Self-soothing. Many adults were never taught how to regulate their emotions. They were taught how to suppress them, or justify them, or explain them away. So when discomfort arises, the body panics, and the fastest relief becomes the goal. But relief is temporary. Safety is built. Self-love means learning how to sit with yourself without fixing, judging, or escaping. It sounds simple. It's not. What it means to be your own anchor, Being your own anchor means this. When you feel anxious, you don't abandon yourself. When you feel sad, you don't shame yourself. When you feel confused, you don't rush into decisions just to feel certain again. You slow down, you breathe. You remind yourself, this feeling will pass and I will still be here. That's how trust with yourself is built. Not through confidence, through consistency. Loneliness versus aloneness. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness says, something is missing. Aloneness says, I am with myself. When you learn to enjoy your own presence, relationships stop feeling like rescue missions. You no longer need people to complete you. You choose them to complement you. And that changes the quality of every connection you have. Why self-love feels unnatural. At first, if you were taught to prioritize others, choosing yourself feels selfish. If you were rewarded for overgiving, rest feels lazy. If you were loved conditionally, self-acceptance feels unsafe. But discomfort doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're rewiring something deep. The quiet power of choosing yourself. Daily self-love isn't one big decision. It's thousands of small ones. Going to bed when you're tired. Saying no without over-explaining. Letting yourself change your mind. Not forcing yourself to be fine. Each time you choose yourself, you send a message inward. I matter, even when no one is watching. And that message rewires everything. But there is still one more step. Because loving yourself isn't just about comfort. It's also about courage. About becoming honest with who you are and who you are no longer willing to be. Chapter 5. The courage to be honest. With yourself. Self-love is not soft. It is brave. It asks you to look at your life without excuses, without blaming the past, without waiting for permission. It asks one quiet but powerful question. Are you living in alignment with who you truly are? Most people avoid this question because the answer demands change. Why self-betrayal becomes a habit. You don't betray yourself all at once. You do it slowly. You stay silent when something hurts. You agree when your body says no. You shrink your needs to keep the peace. You chase approval instead of truth. And each time, it feels small. But over time, those small betrayals create a distance between who you are and who you pretend to be. That distance is where exhaustion lives. Self-love is telling the truth. Gently loving yourself doesn't mean criticizing yourself. It means being honest without cruelty. It sounds like, this relationship no longer feels safe for me. This path doesn't match my values anymore. I've outgrown this version of myself. Honesty doesn't make you selfish. It makes you real. And real people create real peace. Letting go of who you had to be. At some point, you became someone to survive. Strong, easygoing, independent, always available. That version of you did its job. But survival is not the same as fulfillment. Self-love is recognizing when an old identity is no longer required, and having the courage to release it. Why boundaries are an act of love. Boundaries are not walls. They are clarity. They say, this is where I end and you begin. This is what I can give and what I can't. When you don't set boundaries, resentment grows. When you do, respect follows. And the most important boundary you will ever set is with yourself. No more abandoning your needs. No more ignoring your intuition. No more staying where you are not honored. Choosing growth over familiar pain. The mind prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom. That's why change feels threatening, even when it's good. But self-love means choosing growth even when it feels uncomfortable. Even when it costs you versions of yourself that no longer fit. Because comfort without truth is not peace. The turning point. There comes a moment when you stop asking, why doesn't anyone choose me? And start asking, am I choosing myself? That moment changes everything. Because when you choose yourself, you no longer beg for love. You become the source of it. And what comes next is the most powerful shift of all: learning how to treat yourself the way you always wanted others to. Chapter 6. Becoming your own safe place. Before anyone else can feel safe with you, you must feel safe with yourself. Most people search for safety in others, in relationships, in validation, in being needed. But true self-love begins when you become your own safe place. A place where you don't have to perform. A place where you don't have to explain. A place where your feelings are allowed to exist without being judged or rushed away. Why you learn to abandon yourself. You weren't born disconnected from yourself. You learned it. You learned to minimize your emotions because they were too much. You learned to stay quiet because speaking up caused conflict. You learned to adapt because love felt conditional. So you adjusted. And that adjustment kept you alive. But what protected you then may be hurting you now. Self-love is realizing that you no longer need to disappear to be accepted. The inner voice that needs healing. Inside you lives a voice. Sometimes it whispers encouragement. Other times it criticizes, doubts, and shames. That voice is not your enemy. It is a reflection of how you were spoken to, treated, and conditioned. Self-love doesn't silence that voice. It retrains it. You replace, "What's wrong with me?" with, "What do I need right now?" You replace, "I should be better than this," with, "I'm allowed to be human." And slowly, the tone changes. Learning to sit with yourself. Many people stay busy to avoid being alone with their thoughts. Silence feels uncomfortable because it brings truth to the surface. But self-love is learning to sit with yourself without reaching for distractions. To listen instead of escape. To breathe instead of numb. To stay instead of run. Because everything you've been avoiding is actually asking to be understood. Self-soothing is a skill. Self-love is knowing how to calm yourself without needing someone else to fix you. It looks like resting without guilt, saying no without explaining, comforting yourself during hard moments, choosing patience over self-attack. This is emotional maturity, and it is learned through practice, not perfection. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need to be exhausted to deserve rest. You don't need to prove your worth before taking care of yourself. Self-love means understanding that rest is not a reward. It is a requirement. And when you honor that, your energy returns. Your clarity sharpens. Your confidence deepens. The shift that changes everything. When you become your own safe place, you stop chasing safety in people who can't provide it. You stop tolerating inconsistency. You stop begging for reassurance. You stop shrinking to be chosen because you are already choosing yourself. And the next chapter is where self-love turns outward, where your standards rise, your relationships shift, and your life begins to reflect the respect you've learned to give yourself. Chapter 7. When you stop begging to be chosen. There is a quiet moment in self-love that changes everything. It's the moment you realize you don't need to convince anyone to see your value. You don't need to explain your pain. You don't need to overgive to be remembered. You don't need to shrink your needs to keep someone close. That moment is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives when you finally get tired of abandoning yourself. Why you kept chasing validation. If you've ever chased love, approval, or attention, it doesn't mean you're weak. It means you were taught that love was something you had to earn. So you became more understanding than necessary, more forgiving than was healthy, more patient than your heart could handle. You waited. You hoped. You compromised. Not because you lacked standards, but because you lacked self-protection. Self-love raises your standards, naturally. Here's the truth most people miss. Self-love doesn't make you demanding. It makes you clear. You stop asking, "Why don't they choose me?" and start asking, "Why would I choose this?" You don't need ultimatums. You don't need manipulation. You don't need control. Your standards speak for you. Outgrowing. What no longer matches you. Self-love often feels like loss at first, because when you grow, some people can no longer meet you where you are, and that's painful. But staying small to keep connections costs you more than letting them go. Outgrowing something doesn't mean it was bad. It means it served its purpose. And now, you're becoming someone new. You stop over-explaining yourself. When you love yourself, you stop defending your boundaries. You don't justify rest. You don't apologize for distance. You don't over-explain your needs, because the right people don't need convincing. And the wrong people were never going to understand anyway. Self-love is choosing peace over attachment. This is one of the hardest lessons. Sometimes love means walking away from what feels familiar to protect what feels true. Peace becomes more important than chaos. Clarity more important than intensity. Consistency more important than promises. And when you choose peace, your nervous system heals. Your confidence stabilizes. Your life simplifies. The life that follows, self-respect. When you stop begging to be chosen, your life begins to reflect your worth. You attract relationships that feel safe. You create space for joy. You move differently. Because you are no longer asking the world to love you the way you never loved yourself. You already started. And in the next chapter, we explore how self-love becomes your foundation, not just for relationships, but for every decision you make. Chapter 8. Self-love becomes your foundation. There is a moment when self-love stops being something you practice and starts becoming something you stand on. It is no longer an idea. It is no longer a quote. It becomes your foundation, and everything in your life begins to shift. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Why everything starts with how you treat yourself. The way you speak to yourself becomes the way others speak to you. The way you protect your time teaches people how to respect it. The way you handle disappointment shows the world what you tolerate. Self-love is not self-centered. It is self-informing. It tells the world what is allowed in your life and what is not. You make decisions differently. Now, when you love yourself, your decisions slow down, but your life speeds up. You stop reacting. You stop chasing urgency. You stop confusing anxiety with intuition. You ask, does this align with who I'm becoming? Does this cost me my peace? Does this nourish or drain me? And if the answer isn't clear, you don't force it. You wait. That patience is not fear. It is wisdom. Self-love changes your inner dialogue. The voice in your head becomes kinder, not softer, but stronger. You stop saying, I'm not enough, and start saying, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm allowed to take time. You stop bullying yourself for mistakes and start guiding yourself forward. That shift alone changes your entire emotional life. You stop living for approval. Approval loses its grip when self-trust takes its place. You no longer need applause to move. You no longer need validation to continue. You no longer need permission to choose yourself. You know who you are becoming, and that's enough. Self-love is not comfort. It's commitment. This is important. Self-love does not mean everything feels easy. It means you stay loyal to yourself even when it's uncomfortable. You rest when needed. You push when necessary. You forgive yourself and keep going. That balance is what builds real confidence. What happens next? Once self-love becomes your foundation, you stop building your life on fear, on scarcity, on emotional debt. You begin building on clarity, on values, on truth. And in the next chapter, we'll explore how loving yourself first changes your future relationships, before they even begin. Chapter 9. How self-love changes your relationships. When you truly love yourself, your relationships don't just change, they reveal themselves. Some grow stronger, some fall away. Some were never real to begin with. And for the first time, you don't panic when that happens. You understand something powerful now. Not everyone is meant to come with you. You stop begging for emotional safety. Before self-love, you might have stayed quiet to keep the peace. You might have accepted crumbs instead of connection. You might have over-explained your feelings hoping someone would finally understand. But now, You don't beg to be seen. You don't chase consistency. You don't negotiate your worth. You communicate clearly, and you observe the response. If someone listens, respects, and grows with you, they stay. If they dismiss, minimize, or mock your needs, they fade. Not because you're cold, but because you're awake. Boundaries become natural, not aggressive. Self-love teaches you that boundaries are not walls. They are filters. You don't have to be harsh. You don't have to be defensive. You simply become honest. I'm not available for that. That doesn't feel right to me. I need space. No anger, no guilt, no long explanations. And the right people respect that. The wrong people resist it. That's how you know. You choose connection, not attachment. There is a difference between wanting someone and needing them. Self-love breaks emotional dependency. You can love deeply without losing yourself. You can care without abandoning your values. You can walk away without hatred, because you no longer confuse love with fear of being alone. You know how to be with yourself now. Love feels calmer, not louder. Real love does not keep you guessing. It does not drain your energy. It does not demand you shrink. It feels steady, safe, grounded. And if something feels chaotic, addictive, or painful, you don't romanticize it anymore. You recognize it, and you choose peace. What comes after? This loving yourself first doesn't mean you'll never get hurt again. It means you won't stay where you're hurting. If this audiobook resonated with you, share the moment that hit you the hardest, and let us know. What topic would you like to hear next? This was Love Yourself First. And now, go live it.